The sprite flutters through the sunbeam, no larger than a human hand, wings glistening with dew. The merchant laughs, charmed by the tiny creature's antics. 3 days later, his entire caravan will be found frozen in a circle of mushrooms, every soul aboard aged to dust, their final expressions locked in rapturous smiles. This is not an anomaly. This is not a cautionary tale embellished by superstitious farmers. This is the fundamental reality of the Fae, and the profound ignorance surrounding their true nature has filled more graves than plague, war, or dragon fire combined. The common understanding of fairy kind represents perhaps the most dangerous misconception in all the planes. Scholars, adventurers, and even experienced planar travelers persist in categorizing the Fae as mere magical creatures, peculiar perhaps, mischievous certainly, but ultimately comprehensible within the framework of mortal logic. This assumption is not merely incorrect. It is catastrophically, lethally wrong. The Fae are not creatures who use magic. They are not beings who have learned to manipulate arcane forces. They are magic incarnate, primordial manifestations of the natural world itself, possessing minds so alien that mortal comprehension can only ever grasp the faintest shadow of their true nature. From the majestic, terrible courts of the Archfey to the skinless horrors that prowl dark waterways, fairy kind represents the unchecked power of nature given consciousness and will. They harbor grudges that predate recorded history. They operate according to rules that shift like morning mist. They possess beauty that can shatter sanity as efficiently as any eldritch horror from beyond the stars. The Fae do not merely break the laws of nature. They are the laws of nature, unfiltered by mortal concepts of mercy, fairness, or proportion. Understanding the true scope of the Fae requires abandoning comfortable assumptions. It demands recognition that the courts of fairy operate with powers rivaling gods, that their monstrous variants represent threats beyond typical adventuring parties, and that the Archfey themselves command forces capable of reshaping reality according to their incomprehensible whims. A proper exploration of fairy kind must examine their origins in primordial chaos, the biological impossibilities that define their existence, the terrifying duality of their courts, the godlike entities who rule them, and the monstrous manifestations that hunt in forgotten corners of the multiverse. This examination will reveal the essence of what makes the Fae truly dangerous. It is not their magic, though that alone could level kingdoms. It is not their immortality, though that grants perspective and patience mortals cannot fathom. It is their fundamental alienness, the fact that they operate according to logic so divorced from mortal reasoning that every interaction represents a potential catastrophe. The Fae are beautiful and terrible in equal measure, and the line between a blessing and a curse in their hands is so thin as to be functionally non-existent. What follows is a comprehensive treatise on the sovereignty of the wild, an exploration of powers that predate civilization itself, and a warning that has gone unheeded for far too long. To comprehend the Fae, one must first abandon linear thinking and embrace a truth that predates the very concept of history. At the dawn of the multiverse, before the imposition of law, before the establishment of cosmic balance, there existed only formless chaos. This was not chaos as mortals understand it, not mere disorder or randomness, but rather the pure, untamed essence of existence itself. This primordial state was the natural condition of all things, and from this swirling, infinite possibility, the wee folk were born. The Fae did not evolve. They did not develop gradually from simpler forms. They chose to incarnate themselves in physical forms, binding their consciousness to the material world through an act of will that remains beyond mortal magical theory. Critically, this incarnation was not complete. The Fae did not separate themselves from their environment as mortals do, maintaining a distinct boundary between self and surroundings. Instead, they remain intrinsically, fundamentally tied to the wild. They are nature, and nature is them, a relationship so profound that distinguishing between the Fae creature and the forest around it becomes an exercise in philosophical futility. This connection manifests in ways that reshape reality itself. The Fae exist to protect nature, to repair the ravages of time and the encroachment of civilization. They form bonds with beasts that transcend simple animal handling or magical charm. They are drawn inexorably to places of incomparable natural beauty, not as visitors but as integral components of those locations. In certain regions, individuals known as wild souls have learned to tap into this flowing current of primal magic, channeling the pure, untamed essence of fairy to cast their spells. However, this connection demands adherence to mystical taboos that seem arbitrary to mortal minds. A wild soul might be forbidden from eating the meat of predators or prohibited from sitting with their back to the west. These are not simple superstitions, but fundamental requirements imposed by the chaotic nature of Fey magic itself. Where large numbers of Fey congregate, the very fabric of reality warps to accommodate their presence. These locations give rise to phenomena known as soul heart pools, manifestations of pure enchantment magic that appear as unusually calm bodies of clear water, typically measuring roughly 50 feet in diameter. These pools are not merely magical. They are composed of the purest essence of enchantment itself, concentrated to the point of physical manifestation. A mortal gazing into a soul heart pool will witness fleeting, achingly beautiful images dancing across the surface. Old friends, lost loves, cherished memories played out with perfect clarity. The pools seem to offer comfort, nostalgia, a connection to everything the viewer holds dear. Fey creatures utilize these pools to augment their already formidable powers, and mortals who meditate beside them can draw a small portion of this magic into themselves, though the price of such augmentation is rarely understood until far too late. The biological nature of the Fae reveals itself most starkly in their relationship with death and undeath. Because they are immortal, ageless beings dedicated fundamentally to the preservation of life, the Fae harbor an absolute, violent hatred for the undead. This is not mere philosophical disagreement or cultural prejudice. The undead represent the ultimate antithesis of everything the Fae are, existing solely to destroy and consume life. Consequently, the high fairy courts have instituted an absolute prohibition against necromancy. Any Fae suspected of practicing necromantic arts is declared permanently impure and violently banished from the courts forever. There is no appeal, no redemption, no path back to fairy society. The sentence is absolute and eternal. This biological connection to nature reveals itself most dramatically in death. When a Fae creature is slain in cursed lands, such as the mist-shrouded domains of dread, it leaves behind no corpse in the traditional sense. The fallen body immediately reverts to its natural essence, dissolving into a pool of water that is absorbed by the earth, crumbling into a heap of dead leaves and faded flowers, or dissipating as a dark mist that fades into nothingness. Even in death, the Fae return to nature, completing a cycle that mortals can witness but never truly comprehend. In certain realms, particularly the lands of the Diamond Throne, the Fae have organized themselves into a complex, intertwined society known collectively as the Fane. These diminutive humanoids represent a fascinating case study in how chaotic, nature-bound entities can create structured civilization without abandoning their fundamental essence. The Fawn demonstrate profound love for physical pleasure, dedicating themselves to food, games, puzzles, and song with an intensity that borders on religious fervor. Yet beneath this seemingly carefree exterior lies a deep, abiding concern for security. A Fawn entering any building will instinctively catalog every exit, every potential escape route, calculating possibilities for flight with the unconscious ease of breathing. The Fawn separate into 3 distinct biological types, each representing a different aspect of Fae nature. The lore songs are the spellcasters, repositories of arcane knowledge and magical tradition. The Quicklings possess supernatural agility and speed, moving through the world with preternatural grace. The Sprites are winged, taking to the air with natural ease. What makes these divisions particularly fascinating is their biological relationship. Lorisongs and quicklings are 100% biologically compatible, referring to each other as cousins and capable of producing offspring together. However, they produce no true hybrids. A child born of a mixed union will always manifest as fully Lorisong or fully quickling, never expressing traits of both parents. This biological impossibility defies mortal understanding of heredity and genetics, suggesting that Fawn identity operates on metaphysical principles that transcend mere physical inheritance. The Fawn relationship with divinity further illustrates their alien nature. They possess no formal priesthood, no temples, no organized religious hierarchy. Instead, they experience spontaneous moments of divine revelation that can occur at any time, in any circumstance. A Fawn leaping across a chasm might suddenly receive the divine knowledge of Nevik, the god of chasms. Another adjusting a rope might be blessed with understanding from Dara, the goddess of rope. Because every Fawn stands equally close to the divine, capable of receiving revelation at any moment, their society cannot organize around religious authority. Instead, they are ruled by a pair of twin siblings, chosen by divine will, a selection process that remains mysterious even to the Fawn themselves. The Fawn measure time according to their own calendar system, calculating in fluctuating, erratic periods known as Lorisong cycles and quickling cycles. These temporal measurements shift and adjust according to principles so esoteric that only the Fawn can truly comprehend them. To outsiders, Fawn timekeeping appears chaotic, arbitrary, impossible to predict or follow. To the Fawn, it represents the natural order, the proper way to measure existence. This disconnect illustrates a fundamental truth about the Fae. They do not operate according to mortal logic, and attempts to force their behavior into familiar frameworks inevitably fail. However, not all Fae remain within the bounds of civilization, such as it exists in their society. The Darklings represent a faction of quicklings who have abandoned their villages and rejected the trappings of organized society entirely. These renegades dwell in the darkest, most dangerous depths of the Harrowdeep Forest, longing for a primal, violent past that may never have actually existed. The Darklings are highly dangerous, operating without the social constraints that moderate the behavior of their village-dwelling cousins. Many have descended into outright psychosis, their minds fragmenting under the weight of isolation and the unfiltered influence of the deepest, wildest magic. The existence of the Darklings raises uncomfortable questions about Fae nature. Are the village-dwelling Fae suppressing their true nature through social organization? Are the Darklings expressing the authentic Fae essence freed from artificial constraints? Or do both represent equally valid manifestations of fairy chaos, different expressions of the same fundamental reality? These questions have no clear answers, and the Fawn themselves seem uninterested in resolving the philosophical implications. They simply are, existing according to their nature, whether that nature manifests as puzzle-loving villagers or psychotic forest dwellers. Throughout the multiverse, persistent rumors speak of rival courts of Fae, one aligned with light and one devoted to darkness. The Fae themselves rarely share the intricacies of their politics with mortals, maintaining careful silence about internal divisions that predate most mortal civilizations. However, the divide between the courts is absolute, representing not mere political disagreement, but fundamental opposition in purpose, method, and nature itself. The Seelie Court represents the light, serving the fairy lords and residing within hidden fairy hills scattered across the material plane. The most famous representatives of this court are the Sidhi, pronounced as she by those who have heard the word spoken and survived to repeat it. A Sidhe possesses medium size with human-like proportions, vaguely elven features, and pointed ears that mark them as distinctly otherworldly. They love music, dedicating centuries to mastering instruments and vocal techniques that produce sounds mortal musicians can only dream of achieving. They engage in philosophy, debating abstract concepts with an intensity and duration that would exhaust mortal scholars. They study history, though their version of historical events often bears little resemblance to mortal records of the same occurrences. Despite their apparent sophistication, perhaps because of it, the seed engage in behavior that mortals find deeply disturbing. They are infamous as changelings, breaking into mortal homes in the dead of night to steal human babies from their cribs. The stolen infant is replaced with a wooden log, enchanted through powerful glamour magic to feel and appear exactly like the missing child. The deception remains perfect until the parents touch it, breaking the enchantment and revealing the horrible truth. The stolen human baby is raised by the Fae, integrated into fairy society, and granted second sight through specialized rituals. To the Sidae, this kidnapping represents profound love, an act of generosity that gives the child the opportunity to live an immortal, magical life, freed from the limitations and suffering of mortal existence. That the parents are left devastated, that families are destroyed, that the stolen children rarely survive the transition to fairy society, these concerns simply do not register as relevant to the Sidhe mind. The Unseelie Court, known also as the Sidhe Noctur or Dark Fairies, consists of Fae who have been corrupted by nether gods, banished from the fairy realms, and bound to the service of powers that exist only to destroy. They actively hate beauty and goodness, seeking only to frighten, mislead, and murder those who wander into their domains. Where the Seelie might steal a child out of twisted affection, the Unseelie simply kill for sport, entertainment, and the satisfaction of extinguishing light from the world. In the demiplane of dread, the Shadow Fae are known as the Arach, a race with origins in tragedy and enslavement. Millennia ago, a proud Fae civilization fell under the dominion of an eldritch outsider named Gwydion, an entity whose nature and purpose remain subjects of fearful speculation. Gwydion infused the very souls of these Fae with the essence of the plane of shadow, corrupting them at the most fundamental level. Today, the Arach have diverged into highly specialized deadly breeds, each perfected for different aspects of terror and murder. The Sidhe represent the artistic masters of the Shadow Fae, possessing pale, blonde hair and milky white skin that seems to glow faintly in darkness. They are highly vulnerable to sunlight, a weakness that forces them to operate primarily at night or in deep shadow. They possess the magical ability to assume the form of swans or nightingales, appearing as beautiful, innocent creatures right until the moment they strike. In combat, the Sidhe grant what they call a charming kiss, bending the will of victims through a combination of enchantment magic and the raw, overwhelming presence of Fae nature. They rain cursed arrows from concealment, each projectile carrying doom that manifests in unpredictable, horrifying ways. The Powri, more commonly known as Redcaps, serve as the tiny, sadistic assassins of the Unseelie Court. These creatures possess grotesque, warped bodies with feral teeth, snake-like eyes that reflect light like a predator's, and large, wasp-like wings that buzz furiously in flight. Despite their small size, they are profoundly dangerous, utilizing speed, surprise, and an utter absence of mercy to bring down opponents many times their size. The Sith appear pale and blindingly fast, wielding rapiers with supernatural skill. They utilize their innate connection to shadow to assume incorporeal forms, effortlessly evading retaliation while their blades slice through armor and flesh with equal ease. Fighting a Sith represents an exercise in futility for most mortals. By the time the blade is felt, the creature has already dissolved into shadow, repositioning for the next strike. The rulers of the Fae exist on a plane of power that borders on divine. These are the Archfey, entities whose moods dictate weather patterns, whose whims reshape landscapes, and whose conflicts can render entire regions uninhabitable for centuries. They command the courts with absolute authority, not through political maneuvering, but through sheer, overwhelming manifestation of nature's most primal forces. Mulkegan, Queen of the Unseelie Court, stands as perhaps the most terrifying example of what Fae power can become. Her origin defies conventional categorization because she did not begin her existence as Fae at all. Mulkegan started as a lowly succubus, a demon in service to an abyssal prince, her power limited and her status negligible. However, she possessed something that transcended her demonic nature, boundless, vicious hatred for elves and good-aligned fae, combined with the intelligence and patience to act on that hatred effectively. Malkegan orchestrated the seduction and recruitment of an entire council of good-aligned druids, corrupting servants of nature itself and turning them against everything they once protected. This achievement earned her promotion to abyssal nobility, granting her resources and authority far beyond typical demonic advancement. She did not stop there. Over centuries, Malkegan spread her influence across countless alternate realities, establishing herself not in one world, but in infinite variations of the multiverse simultaneously. She overcame the fundamental limitations of her demonic nature through sheer force of will and accumulated power, transforming herself into a true demigod. Her method was as elegant as it was horrific. She twisted good-natured spirits and fae across all worlds, corrupting them into dark, menacing shapes that served her purposes. Where once there were protective nature spirits, Malkegan left predators that hunted mortals for sport. Where once there were healing springs blessed by benevolent fae, she created poisoned pools that drove victims to madness. She reshaped the fundamental nature of the fae across reality itself, claiming the title of Queen of Brambles and establishing herself as the absolute ruler of the Unseelie Court. Today, Malkegan's seat of power is a massive fortress hidden deep within impenetrable brambles that tear flesh from bone and poison blood with the merest scratch. She appears as a severely beautiful elf woman, her features perfect enough to draw mortals forward against their better judgment. However, from the abdomen down, she possesses the monstrous legs and wings of a gigantic wasp, a form that reflects both her demonic origins and her conquest of fae nature. In battle, she wields Darkroot, a highly intelligent and malevolent longbow that whispers corruption to those it targets, offering power in exchange for service, promising survival in return for betrayal. Malkegan's followers actively prey upon elven communities built near the Briarwoods, targeting settlements with calculated precision. Her agents regularly spirit away elven youths, children, and teenagers stolen from their homes and taken deep into the woods. Cut off from civilization, abandoned in a hostile wilderness, these youths face a simple choice: adapt or die. They adapt. They revert to primal, feral existence, hunting animals with their bare hands, fighting predators, sleeping in trees and caves. They forget language, forget their families, forget civilization itself, until nothing remains but instinct and survival. Once they are completely feral, having forgotten everything they once were, Malkegan personally invites them to the Unseelie Court. She appears as a beautiful, terrible mother figure, offering them shelter, food, and most seductively, belonging. The feral youths, starved for connection after years of isolation, eagerly swear oaths of absolute defense to the Queen. They pledge their lives, their souls, everything they are, and everything they will ever be to serve and protect Malkegan. In a dark, horrific transformation ritual, Malkegan turns these children into vampires, known as foundlings. The process strips away the last vestiges of their mortality while binding them eternally to her service. Desperate for love and attention, having spent years in isolation followed by the overwhelming warmth of Malkegan's acceptance, the foundlings are fiercely, absolutely loyal to their adoptive, monstrous mother. They discover far too late that there is a terrible, eternal price for her affection. They are bound to her service forever, unable to disobey, unable to escape, unable even to want freedom because she has become the center of their existence. They committed atrocities in her name, believing themselves loved, never understanding that to Malkegan, they are merely tools, weapons to be expended when necessary and replaced when broken. Not all fae resemble elves, sprites, or even humanoid forms. Some manifest as hulking, bestial horrors that utilize their innate connection to nature not for protection or preservation, but for hunting mortal prey with unparalleled savagery. These monstrous variants represent fae nature stripped of any pretense of civility or restraint, pure predation given consciousness and supernatural power. Against such creatures, veteran monster hunters recommend utilizing the rare Shalosha plant, a natural deterrent known to be marginally useful against aggressive Fae, though its effectiveness varies wildly depending on the specific creature encountered. The redcap of the material plane, distinct from the tiny powdery assassins of the Shadow Fae, stands as a medium-sized horror that haunts desolate, violent places. Redcaps are evil, wicked creatures with a warlike bent that drives them to seek out locations steeped in bloodshed. They make their lairs in treacherous mountains, preferring to haunt old towers or half-ruined castles where great slaughters have previously occurred. The lingering resonance of mass death attracts them, feeds them, sustains their connection to the darkest aspects of nature. A redcap resembles a very old, broad-shouldered man with skinny arms that seem too weak to pose a threat. This appearance is profoundly deceptive. Those skinny arms end in long, sharp talons capable of shredding armor and flesh with equal ease. They wear heavy iron boots that they use to brutally stamp their enemies to death, jumping on fallen foes repeatedly, grinding bones to powder and flesh to pulp. They wear cloth caps that they continuously dye in the fresh blood of anyone foolish enough to try and sleep in their territory, hence their name. The cap must remain wet with blood, requiring regular kills to maintain, creating a cycle of violence that feeds itself. In combat, a redcap can work itself into a supernatural battle frenzy, a state that drastically increases its physical strength and constitution while making it highly resistant to magical coercion. Spells that would normally dominate minds or charm emotions slide off the frenzied redcap like water off stone. The creature becomes a whirlwind of talons and iron boots, killing with efficiency born of centuries of practice. Defeating a redcap requires overwhelming force applied rapidly. Allowing the fight to drag on only strengthens the creature as its frenzy builds. The Gleistig haunts lakes and ponds in temperate wilderness, an aquatic dark fae that exemplifies how beauty can be weaponized. Gleistigs appear as incredibly beautiful female humanoids from the waist up, their features perfect, their voices mesmerizing. However, their lower halves consist of hairy legs and hooves of a goat, a bestial nature they carefully hide beneath flowing clothes that trail in the water. They position themselves at the water's edge, singing or calling for help, using every trick of appearance and voice to draw targets closer. Gleistigs use their innate dominate person abilities to magically lure men to the edge of the water, overwhelming will and better judgment with supernatural compulsion. Once the victim is close enough, within reach, the Gleistig uses its debilitating touch to completely drain the victim's physical strength to zero. The effect is not gradual. One moment, the victim is standing, walking, approaching the beautiful figure. The next moment, every muscle fails simultaneously, reducing the victim to a paralyzed, helpless state. The Gleistig then drags the victim down into its underwater lair, a chamber filled with previous victims in various states of decline. The paralyzed victim serves as a living host and food source for the Gleistig's young, kept alive through Fey magic, while larvae slowly consume them from the inside out. If threatened in combat, if the situation turns against them, Gleistigs will hurl a dagger with supernatural accuracy and immediately dive into the safety of the water, where they possess advantages no land-dwelling creature can match. The Knuckleavey perhaps represents the most physically revolting Fey in existence, a large aquatic horror that prowls desolate waterways to ambush lone victims. Its anatomy is a nightmare of fused flesh that defies biological possibility. The lower half of the creature is a horse with fiery eyes and poisonous breath, but this is not a rider mounted on a horse. The upper body sprouts directly from the horse's back, a human-shaped torso with arms so impossibly long that they sweep the ground as the creature moves. The torso is topped by a massive, lolling head completely devoid of a spine, the skull rolling and bobbing with each step. Most horrifying of all, the Knuckleavey possesses absolutely no skin. Its pulsing muscles, pumping veins, and yellowed bones are completely exposed to open air, glistening with fluids that should be internal. The mere sight of a Knuckleavey invokes its horrific appearance ability, a supernatural effect beyond simple fear. Anyone who looks upon the beast must fight off a wave of utter, overwhelming revulsion that strikes at a level deeper than conscious thought. Failure causes the victim's strength to fail, not drained as with the Glaistig, but simply shutting down, the body refusing to obey commands while the mind remains fully aware and functional. The victim is rendered physically helpless to move or fight, capable only of taking purely mental actions, watching in full awareness as the beast approaches. In melee, the Nuckalave tramples foes beneath its hooves, the weight and force crushing bones and rupturing organs. It exhales a 40-foot cone of highly toxic, poisonous gas that sears lungs and blisters exposed skin, killing through suffocation and tissue damage simultaneously. The Nuckalave's only true weakness is natural sunlight, not magical illumination or light spells, but genuine sunlight from an unobscured sun. A Nuckalave caught in natural sunlight is rendered utterly powerless, all its supernatural abilities failing at once. It flees in terror, unable to mount an attack, desperate only to reach darkness and water where its power returns. This vulnerability explains why Nuckalaves hunt only at night or in heavily overcast conditions, emerging from their lairs only when assured that the sun cannot reach them. Another terrifying manifestation of martial Fey power is the entity known as Navar's Curse, standing as a large Fey that embodies the unyielding wrath of the wild. This heavily armored monstrosity wears armor enchanted to unnatural degrees of protection, granting defensive capabilities that turn aside all but the most powerful attacks. It wields both a massive greatsword and a short sword with lethal efficiency, switching between them according to tactical need, demonstrating combat skill that surpasses most mortal warriors. Navar's Curse boasts profound spell resistance, magical wards that cause spells to simply fail when targeted against it, unraveling before they can take effect. It possesses the ability to inflict magical curses upon its foes, debilitations that persist long after the battle ends, weakening victims permanently. Its suite of spell-like abilities allows it to adapt to various combat situations, teleporting short distances, summoning barriers of thorns, or calling swarms of stinging insects to blind and distract enemies. The Fae stand as the ultimate paradox of the multiverse, embodying contradictions that mortal minds struggle to reconcile. They are the gentle, song-loving wanderers who dedicate centuries to perfecting artistic expression, and they are the blood-soaked redcaps stamping mortals to death in ruined keeps for the crime of seeking shelter. They are the beautiful changelings who steal infants out of twisted, incomprehensible love, genuinely believing they offer these children a better life, and they are the skinless, toxic Nuckalaves rising from dark waters solely to inflict suffering and death. Governed by Archfey like the demon queen Mulkegan, entities whose power rivals lesser deities and whose influence spans infinite realities, the Fae represent the unbridled, amoral power of nature itself. Nature does not recognize mercy, does not comprehend fairness, does not acknowledge that mortals deserve consideration or protection. Nature simply is, vast and beautiful and terrible, creating and destroying with equal indifference. The Fae are this nature given consciousness, will, and immortality, operating according to rules that seem arbitrary because they reflect processes mortals were never meant to understand. To step into a fairy ring is not a whimsical adventure. It is surrendering one's fate to a court that views mortal life as both a fascinating plaything and a wholly disposable resource. To listen to a song echoing from a hidden pool is not an opportunity for wonder. It is an invitation to become part of something older and more powerful than civilization itself, something that may grant wishes or may steal decades in an eye blink, something that operates according to no logic save its own nature. The Fae do not hate mortals. They do not love mortals. They exist in relationship to mortals the way a storm exists in relationship to a sailing ship, capable of carrying it to safety or dashing it against rocks, making no distinction between the two outcomes, because both are equally natural, equally valid expressions of what a storm is.